In this video, we are going to talk about loops in Java. Iteration is the process of repeating the same code or same block of code multiple times, and there are many times in the course of writing a program where you might want to do that. So one way to accomplish that is through what are called loops. And a loop is just a construct that allows you to repeat a block of code essentially. And so Java has three types of loops: the while loop, the for loop, and the do while loop. All right, and we're going to talk about each one of those. So the very first one is the while loop. The while loop allows you to repeat a block of code while a given condition is met. And so that condition will be a Boolean expression. And just recall, a Boolean expression is an expression that evaluates to either true or false. Okay? So a while loop has the following form. It has the keyword while, and then in parentheses, there's a condition. And remember, that's a Boolean expression, something that evaluates to either true or false. And then inside curly braces, a code block. Okay? So when execution comes to one of these while loops, the first thing that it does, it checks that condition, and that condition is either going to be true or false. Okay. If the condition is true, then it will perform the statements that are in the code block. When it gets done with the statements that are in the code block, it will check the condition again. If the condition is false, then execution will go to the next statement after the code blocks. So it will not perform the code block anymore. Okay, so that's how the while loop works. All right, so let's just take a look at a standard while loop. In a standard while loop, you pretty much have to do three things. Number one is set up a variable, and you're going to use that variable to control the loop. Okay, so here I have an int variable, which it oftentimes is. Okay. Then part two is to use that variable in the condition for the while loop. So here I say while n is less than 11. Okay. And then inside the loop body, then you will need to alter the loop variable. So here's where I do that. This statement just adds 1 every single time to the variable n. Okay, so let's just trace through this a little bit, right? So first off, n is 0, so I'm going to write that value. That sets n to 0. And then execution is going to fall to this part of the loop here. And so it's going to check this condition, n is less than 11. Well, right now, n is 0, so 0 is less than 11. And that's therefore this will be true. So it will print this is a message. All right. Then it will come to this line. And right now n is 0. So this it'll put a 0 right here. 0 plus 1 is 1. And then it will store the 1 back in here. So now the value for n has changed to a 1. All right. So that was the last line in the loop body. It will come up here and check the condition again. Is n less than 11? Well, it is, because n is 1. So it will print this message again. This is a message, so it'll print it again. N is currently 1, so this will be 1 plus 1, right, which is 2. So that will change the value of n to 2. And so this will keep going, right, over and over again. Eventually, n will be 10. All right, so when n is 10, it will check the condition. 10 is less than 11, that's true. It will print this message, and then this line will add 1 to the value of n, so that will make n be 11. All right, and so then it will check the condition. 11 is less than 11, that's false, and so it will jump to whatever line is after the code block. Okay. So if you forget to do steps 1, 2, or 3, that can result in your program getting stuck in an infinite loop. if that happens, then in JGrasp, what you want to do is click the end button. So let's see if I have this example. Yeah, so click this end button right here to stop the program if you get stuck in an infinite loop like that. Okay. All right. And we will take a look at that in a second. Again. Okay, so the main use for a while loop is you want to use a while loop when you want to repeat a block of code. That's obvious, right? Because that's what it does. It repeats a block of code. But it is most useful when you need to repeat a block of code and you don't really know ahead of time how many times you need to repeat it. So sort of a classic example of that is when you're asking the user for some input and you want to make sure that that input is valid input. So let's say you ask, the user to type in a number between 1 and 10, right? You can't really look into the future and say, oh yeah, it's going to take the user only 2 times to do that or 3 times or whatever. You just don't know the situation, okay? And so if the user types in a number that's not between 1 and 10, you want to ask them again, hey, would you type in a number between 1 and 10? Okay, and they don't do it. Then you say, hey, that wasn't between 1 and 10. Can you type in a number from 1 to 10? So that's an example where you would need to repeat asking over and over again, but you don't know ahead of time how much you need to ask. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at this while loop example. In the while loop example, let's run it and you can see the effect. So the very first thing I do is print out a table of some numbers, 7 raised to some powers. Then I do a countdown backwards from 12 to 0, starting with or going down by 3s. Okay. Next up, I ask the user to enter a whole number, and I enter a 5. And here, let's see, it says, all right, so in this case, if the user enters some input that's not a whole number, then I keep asking. So let's run that again so you can kind of see how that goes. All right, so I enter a letter A, that's not a whole number. Right, I enter D, that's not a whole number, right, and so on and so forth. So I just keep asking until the user enters a whole number, and then I terminate the loop, okay? All right, so the first loop, right, was just this loop that counted up by 1s here. So here I set up a variable n to control the loop. I use that variable in a condition, right? N is less than 5. And here's the message that I'm printing. And here's where I change the variable, right? I change it and increase it by 1 every single time. Okay? Okay. And so notice here, right? So this is very similar to the one that we just looked at in the slides. Notice that I am using, right, this variable, the loop variable, in my statement right here. So I'm using it right here and right here. So that's how I'm able to repeat this block of code, right? You can see this is where I use n, and it's going up by 1, right? Like we talked about because of this statement here. And then I'm using n over here to find the power of 7. So 7 to the first power is 7, 7 squared is 49, and so on and so forth. Okay? All right, in the next loop, I am counting down counting down at 12. So I initialize n to 12. All right, and then my condition looks slightly different, right? So my condition is n is greater than -1. If you compare that to last time where we were counting up, right, the inequality sign is turned the opposite way. All right, so that's because each time this value of n is going to be going down, right? It's going down by 3. Eventually, that value will get to 0, right? And we'll test this. Is 0 greater than -1? That's true. And so that's why it prints countdown 0. So then when I get to this statement, every time through the loop, you can see I am subtracting 3 every single time. Before, when we were counting up by 1s, I was adding a 1. So if I want to go down by 3s, I would subtract 3 every single time. So when n is 0, then this will result in n becoming a -3. It goes to back up here to check the condition. Is -3 greater than -1? Well, no, it's not. It's false, right? So it will skip to the next loop over here. All right, in this final loop here, I'm asking the user to enter a whole number, and I'm using scanner. And then this is something that we haven't used before. The has next int will just look at the information that the user typed in and see if it's an int. Okay. And if it's an int, has next int will be true, and if it's not, it will be false, right? So, and then notice I have the logical not operator in front of there. So if the user types in a letter like I was doing, this will be false, and then that not will change it to true. Okay, so, and then that will trigger, right, this code right here. If the user types in an int like they are supposed to, then has next int will return a true, but then this not operator will change the result to a false. And so therefore that will skip this loop if they type in good input. Okay, if they type in an int. All right. And then, so inside the loop, I clear out their bad input as a string, so that won't cause any problems. It won't cause my program to crash. Okay. And then I print a warning message. Hey, you didn't type in a whole number. You typed in, please enter a whole number. And then it tries again. Okay. Okay. And so now don't think just because I showed you this example that you have to like start validating your input using this. That's not true at all. And I really just kind of want you to wait until we get to exceptions to start working on that. It's just a little bit cleaner if we validate user input that way. Okay, especially with scanner. So don't worry about this. My only motivation for showing you this is to look at some while loop that's slightly different from the standard. Both of these are pretty standard while loops up here. So I just wanted to show you one that wasn't exactly the same as the previous ones. Okay. In one of our practice or example problems that we'll take a look at, I will do this as well in a different way. And when we do that, we just won't worry about validating user input for the time being. Okay, so in this last example, I uncomment. I have this commented out because it will cause an error. So I'm going to uncomment this, and so you can see what it looks like when you're stuck in an infinite loop. If you go back and take a look at the 3 things that we need for a while loop, some variable, set up some variable before the while statement. Okay, so I'm using n, which I already used up there, but I can use it again. So that's why I don't have int in front of it. Use that variable in the condition for the while loop. Okay, and then update the variable inside the loop body, right? Those are the 3 things. And you can see here I've only done 2 of those. I forgot to update the loop inside the loop body. That's a pretty common mistake to make. All right, so I want you to see what it looks like when you get stuck in here. All right, so here you can see we are stuck in an infinite loop, and this one is pretty easy to spot because you can just see it looks like it's repeating this over and over again. Okay, and so all you would do is press end like this to get out of there. All right, so now it's really easy to tell when something's being printed out inside the loop body. But if you do not print anything out, which is fairly common as well, when you get stuck in that infinite loop, it's going to be harder to tell. So when I run this, I'm going to enter the whole number. Okay, and you can see because I commented out line 59 there's nothing being done while I'm inside that loop. Okay, and so you're just kind of sitting here looking at it. It looks like it's done, but you're not quite sure. It's much harder to tell that you're stuck in an infinite loop. This end button should still be active, right? So that's one way to tell. And so I'm going to end this and get out of the loop. You can see the end button, right, becomes inactive. It's deactivated, right? And so that's another way to tell. If the end button looks like you can click on it and nothing else is happening in your program, you might be stuck in that infinite loop. And so just click on the end button to get out of there. Okay. All right. That's it for the while loop. In the next video, we will talk about the do while loop.